Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones. This is Season 14, Episode 13. If you're craving a taste of award-winning writing that goes beyond the kitchen, well, buckle up because we have a literary feast for you today. Joining me in the stacks is a two-time James Beard Award winner who seasoned his words in publications like the New York Post, Esquire, and even Marvel Comics. He's also brought his talents to SiriusXM and Conan O'Brien's Team Coco. Please give a warm welcome to the multi-talented writer and editor, John Devore. We'll begin talking with John about his new book, Theater Kids, out now. On to our conversation. Welcome to the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. I'm your host, Dean Jones, and today I'm very happy to be talking to somebody I've read for many years and whose work I've always loved. John Devore is on our podcast today. John, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you, Dean. I'm glad that we finally got around to doing this podcast. I'm so happy.
Yeah, for our listeners, we've suffered through the trials of Job, let's just say that, to get to this interview.
Right, back and forth. Can we postpone? My ceiling's falling in, and you email me. Can we postpone? There's a jackhammer outside my window, but here we are.
Literally.
No.
Just like in the cartoons. All right. For our listeners who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up and where you currently live now?
Yeah, sure. So my name is John Devore. I grew up in Northern Virginia. I was a Beltway brat. I come from a long line of Texans. My dad worked for a Texas politician. And so growing up in Northern Virginia is sort of like growing up nowhere. So I like to think of myself as ethnically Texan. You know, my mom is a Mexican-American from El Paso. So Texas loomed large in my life. I went to art school in Virginia too. And then shortly after graduation, a long time ago, I moved to New York. And I have been here ever since 1996.
Did you want to be a writer when you were a kid? Was that like a dream of yours growing up?
Yeah. The story that I tell is that, I struggled in school when I was younger.
Me too.
I think it was a different time in terms of strategies on how to deal with children who know, you can't retroactively diagnose yourself, but things are different now. But in a testament to what a good, compassionate teacher can do for a student, in fifth grade, I had a teacher assign me an essay that was what I did for Christmas break. And what I did was had gone to the Grand Canyon, and I plagiarized the pamphlet about the Grand Canyon that I had gotten from a kiosk there. So it read like this. This went, for Christmas, we went to the Grand Canyon, a mighty chasm carved by the hand of God, and I'm sure she knew that I could not have written that. But she read my essay and she said, "Why, John, do you think you're a writer?" And I went, maybe. And there you go. She was encouraging of any effort, even a highly suspect and unethical effort.
Now, for your writing accolades, you are a two-time James Beard Award-winning writer. That's a pretty big deal. Can you elaborate on the awards and writing projects that they recognized?
Well, I love saying that because it was actually it's true, 100% true. This is not plagiarizing the Grand Canyon pamphlet. I won 2 awards for one essay about 10 years ago. And it was an essay called Finding Home in Taco Bell. It was written for Eater. It won the best, there's a Beard Award for basically first person essay. So I won that. And then I won their M.K. Fisher Literary Award. They have a special award for excellence, and they call out for an excellent writing or an excellent essay, and they name it after the person who wrote, the famous Consider the Oyster essay.
Oh yeah.
And what that essay was about was, it started out by this editor at Eater starting a franchise around chain restaurants, and she wanted to know if anyone had any strong emotions about Taco Bell. And I did. And I pitched you an essay, and I wrote an essay about how my mom, a Mexican American, I'd say second generation, loved Taco Bell growing up, because Taco Bell was, to some, not incorrectly, an obnoxious sort of bastardization of Mexican culture. But to my mom and a lot of Mexican Americans at that time, it looked like a symbol of successful assimilation. She loved Taco Bell. Was it the food of her mother and her grandmother? No. But it was, and I also wrote about in the piece, struggling with being biracial, struggling with being white presenting, struggling with having a mother who is a different color than you are, which I think is a very common struggle for children of mixed race parentages. So that's what the essay sort of wrestled with.
Nice. Now, you also have over 10 years of editing experience leading creative teams for media companies like Hearst, News Corp, Warner Media, and SiriusXM. Can you talk about your experiences in this role?
Well, Dean, I have been a just I don't know, like just a media glutton for that all of those were different jobs that were all insane for their own reasons. I had a show on at Sirius for years, and working on satellite radio before the proliferation of podcast was an interesting sort of mini era. I've launched dozens of websites. I have worked in social video. Media is so fractured, and it requires so much agility and disciplinary agility that my career is really about what was needed at that time and the kind of jobs that were available at that time. I'm just like right now running a freelance business. I write a lot of I write copy for brands, and I am, like a lot of freelancers, are kind of struggling with finding opportunities in the publishing world, which is currently being rocked by AI. The relationship between publishers and writers is kind of being renegotiated in real time without the writers involved, because a lot of publishers are trying to figure out what they can get away with using AI, which to them is a tantamount to free labor.
Yeah, I know you largely from Humungous, but I know that I've seen, like, for instance, the article that you got the awards for. I remember reading that when it came out, and I've seen your name in different things through the years in different contexts. So your name has become very familiar with me. I think when I saw you and your work on Humungous, I had already been like, I kind of know who this guy is. But
well, thank you for you work Humungous, though.
Yeah,
that's nice of you.
Very, very great blog, and I always loved your writing on there.
That was, Humungous was a period when Medium, the social media long-form writing platform that has struggled and succeeded and struggled again for a decade now, there was a period where they were doling out contracts to people to create custom publications. And the one that you mentioned, I had about a 3-year contract with them to create a site called Humungous, which was about masculinity and pop culture. And so I wrote a lot about sobriety and toxic masculinity and action movies.
I've talked to people a lot on this podcast who will have a book out, and then we'll be talking, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I used to write for The Nose," and I'll be like, "Oh, I remember The Nose," and like, yeah, it's funny because like I have grown up largely since my 20s. I've seen magazines come and go. I remember I used to love going to the newsstand. There were so many new magazines that were really wonderful, like The Egg and stuff like that, and just so many great magazines that don't exist anymore. And likewise, I've seen publications online come and go. What's it been like navigating this, including like social media platforms like SiriusXM, like, and in the different contexts? You've had many different voices on these. You've seen kind of like, you've been surfing kind of the tide for the past 20 years.
And I keep waiting to wipe out, and I have wiped out. So I love the surfing metaphor. Look, I love magazines, and I got my start in publishing in magazines. I worked for trade magazines. That's, those are my early jobs. I loved making magazines. I loved the process of making magazines. I loved reading magazines. Obviously, the internet just has eaten the lunch of what a magazine purpose was, which was to be entertaining and informative and disposable. Also, magazines, the best magazines were very voicey, or they were wrapped around a single personality's sensibility. They were like curated little gardens for nerds. And I like to think that, it must have been great to have been a Vanity Fair editor in the 80s or 90s, to have been, Graydon Carter or Tina Brown, and just to have been in that era where magazines made money, and not only made money, but they moved the cultural needle. It was a great era. Spot.
I mean, I would say, like, I would argue, like, I never, nobody's ever said that the Gen X has a we don't have an Algonquin roundtable, but if we were to say have one, we would have like Douglas Coupland, we would have Donna Tartt, and then we would have like Michael Musto from The Voice, and we would have I think
you'd have Jane Pratt, you would have Dave Eggers.
Yep.
I know I'm missing a bunch. Then, of course, there are those who are, I guess, on the younger end of Gen X, like Elizabeth Spears from Gawker. You'd have a lot of the early sort of bloggers,
But I put you at those.
We were talking about, we were talking about San Francisco, but certainly there was a nascent, small literary. I mean, obviously there's been a literary scene in San Francisco for forever. But there was, in the late 90s, a very specific sort of Gen X blogger literary sort of scene, like Cory Doctorow or his partner who he created Boing Boing with. Anyway,
I remember Boing Boing.
Yeah, Boing Boing was great. Yeah.
But I would put you at that table, like
Dean, you.
But you. Well, listen, let's look at this laundry list of stuff that you got here, because you've been publishing everywhere. We have you in Esquire, Food and Wine, Mill Magazine, GQ, CNN, Comedy Central, Playboy, Men's Journal, Marvel Comics, Cosmopolitan, Vanity Fair, Observer, Cracked and Decider. That's a big deal.
Yeah, and I've also, in that time too, been laid off 6 times. Look, I am and have been like a working writer, which means it's been very feast and famine. I have some great bylines. Certainly, the book that I've just published is sort of the climax in some ways of my career. And I'm happy to have written this book. I'm almost 50, later in my life. But yeah, no, it's a lot of hustle, and a lot of luck.
Speaking of your book, your new book is Theater Kids, and this delves into the highly experimental production of As I Lay Dying. Can you detail your unique aspects of this adaptation of William Faulkner's work?
So, Theater Kids is my attempt to capture a few months in the year 2004 and to sort of delve into this off Broadway experimental theater scenes that I was a part of and that I kind of love in retrospect. These were artists creating theater that no one would see, and throwing their entire heart and love into something. I sometimes think, everybody who publishes on the internet, there's a chance that what you publish could go viral. Probably won't, but there's a chance it could go viral. And off Broadway, there was no chance that anything would happen. Partly the book is about, that was a very dark time for me. I was drinking too much. My father had just passed away, and a friend of mine cast me in his 4-hour adaptation of this Faulkner book in a small theater in Brooklyn that he staged within a gigantic abstract coffin that could only sit like 13 people. The cast was like 14. And he sank thousands of dollars into this production that was probably only seen by 100 people. And so the book is a little bit about found family. It's about making art for art's sake. Yeah, you know, I love that era, and I love theater, and I love people who make art that has no chance of succeeding beyond making the people who are making it happy.
How did you become involved in this play?
Oh, you know, I went to art school and I came to the city, and you know, when you have young people leave college and decide that they're going to move to a city, you know, one of the best pieces of advice for them is to find community and to try and find, you know, I think I had to learn a lesson where I thought that it was important for me to find mentors, and I think mentors are important, and to find people who are like a bit beyond you, people who can show you the ropes. But I think it's just as important to establish who your peers are and spend time with them, because career-wise, at least, whenever I've been helped in my career, it's usually by somebody who's a peer of mine, who has worked with me laterally, instead of a mentor. And so I found off Broadway because a friend of a friend was like, "You want to come?" You know, I didn't know anyone in New York. You want to come see this thing? You know, you want to hang out after? And then I meet weirdos, all the people that when you're young you want to meet in the city. You know, freaks and egomaniacs and sweethearts. I wanted to meet him, and I met him. And the next thing you know, I'm wasting my time and money rolling around in a shitty little theater.
One of the themes that I really loved in the book was the dedication and the dogged determination of the people that were in the cast and crew for the play. What do you think motivated you guys to invest so much into the project, knowing that it might be kind of problematic?
I think any artist, you know, you were listing some of my bona fides, and it made me awkward, right? And I probably dismissed them a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it's hard when people say, "Oh, you did a good thing." So I think it's hard. I think there has to be a measure of denial. Every artist has to sort of have two conversations with themselves, an honest one and one that's sort of in denial.
Yeah.
You know, I have been what I call a hack writer for a while, and I want to get paid for my writing, and so I seek that out. And it's not always writing that I love or I'm proud of, but I write it. But then there are works that I love, and I'm in a little denial about it. I think when it came to this Faulkner show and these plays in general that I write about, these theater productions, there's a little bit of denial. Like, you know, what if, you know, the publisher of New York Times accidentally stumbles into this garage in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and says, "My God, this should be on the front page." You know, we knew that there was no way, but we, you know, what if is a very powerful sort of thing. I also think a lot of my friends there saw themselves part of a tradition of avant-garde, sort of European-informed theater. And there was a little bit of subversiveness there, because to be an American is to produce and create something that has a dollar sign attached to it. I'm not saying that's good or not, but a lot of America is about, there's that cliche when you tell your dad that you want to be an artist, and he's like, "Well, what are you going to do for a living? Or what is your fallback career going to be?" So I think some of the people that I worked with, they were doing it because someone else had done it. Someone else that they had admired, someone, Grotowski in Poland. They wanted to be part of this artistic tradition that was doing something for some other reason other than profit. I think it's very subversive to be an artist in America if you're not intent on selling what you're making.
Yeah. the play received lukewarm reviews, and there was not a huge audience turnout. How did this affect the overall experience of everybody that was involved in the play?
The John in the book was struggling, and the play buoys him for a little while until I don't want to give things away, but it buoys him for a little while, and then who I am in the book might not really. I don't necessarily think I care. It was probably very hurtful to the director, to my friend Michael.
Yeah.
Because he put his all in it. This is also the nature of theater and its ephemerality too. Like it's almost every theater production is almost always has an element of anticlimax to it. Because one day, even a hit show, one day the play closes, and did it exist? There's no DVD. There's like it's maybe there's shitty video of it, but did it exist? A lot of the actors there just went on to the next gig, or they went on to the next project, or they made the next thing. I think a lot of them had that sort of mindset, which is what's next.
It's weird I've done plays, and then when they're over,
okay.
you go through kind of a withdrawal. It's kind of weird.
Sure.
It messes with your head a little bit.
Withdrawal is a valid word. I think grieving.
Yeah.
Is I think the withdrawal aspect is because there's so much, because live theater can be kind of addictive. There's so many, there's adrenaline, and there's so much dopamine. There's the connecting, with other people. Like there's a high to performing that when it's gone, sure, there's an absolute chemical crash. I also think that there is grieving, it's not uncommon to have very intense relationships with cast members that don't carry on once the show is over.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also kind of a high. Like for me, it was a very addicting high to be on stage. What was the energy like for you, and how did you perceive it at the time you were doing the play? Like, was it kind of like a roller coaster kind of thing?
I have one reason I was, as I outlined in the book, I'm not a good actor. There's many reasons for that. One being I'm lazy. Another being seen like that as an actor by other people is a very anxiety-inducing experience for me. So any high that I was getting, and at the time in the book, I was fucking drunk and high for some of those performances. But no, I don't get the high nor the satisfaction from acting. And there's, again, many reasons for that. My own brain chemical, my own talent level. There are just some people who love the high, but there's some people who are just good at it.
Yeah. Well, that being said, do you think you'd ever act again? Do you think you might do a play?
Well, I'm doing podcasts. No, well, here, let me reframe that. No, but I do have a pleasant daydream where I retire upstate New York to some small town in the woods where I wear caftans and direct locals in incredibly self-indulgent Shakespeare productions in a barn. Is it my mention? In a barn with a little lights that come down. So there is a part of me that's like where I see myself in my retired age, sort of like traipsing through town. There's the director John Devore, and then he's doing the Tempest this year at the old barn. I could see that for myself. Yeah, 100%.
This is a delicious image. I would love to see this as a film. That sounds great.
I'm trying to think of myself. It's like, what would really be, and also I've shared this with friends of mine. I'm like, and then you guys can just retire up in this little town and we can have brunch and then rehearse. There's a segment in the book where I talk about how, in a way, how one of my afterlives is rehearsal. I do love rehearsal. I do love the ritual of coming together and playing and then going home. I do love spending the day rehearsing, working, and when I'm not doing a scene, relaxing, giggling, snacking, catching up, gossiping. there is a part of me that heaven is an all day. Well, one of my heavens is rehearsal in the afternoon.
Yes.
I do love rehearsal.
I totally understand what you're saying. You brought me back. Your book really brought me back too. I really love, it's the pre-iPhone era.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful time period. Can you talk about when the book takes place and how you kind of recreated the magic for this book?
Yeah, I call it the, post 9/11 pre-iPhone New York. And so that was a very specific period where New York is still reeling from those attacks, which have become, they've been, the 9/11 attacks have been political fodder for so long. I think that they have increasingly become abstract to sort of younger people. They've become memes or distant memories. But the trauma of that day is very real for me. I wasn't there. I mean, I was in the 20s, but
Yeah.
it's just a crazy era. So the city is still kind of smarting, and the country is full on at war. And the country is fucking, people forget, but like 70% of the country was really into the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. And the war, the country had bloodlust, and New York was the reason. So New Yorkers were used, the 9/11 was being used as a prop.
Yep.
And the New Yorkers were being used unwillingly, I might add, as a prop. It was a really crazy period that I think we've forgotten, specifically 2004. One of the many strategies that the Bush administration used to win in 2004 too was just rancid homophobia. I also think people forget Oberfeld, the Supreme Court ruling allowing for gay marriage. I think it's been lost to history, the era before that. But the degree to which the Bush administration used same-sex marriage as a political wedge issue in states like Ohio and Pennsylvania, it was real rancid stuff. It was a real chauvinistic, scary, ugly time. Meanwhile, you began to have in New York the connectedness of the internet without it seeping into your person the way that it did with a smartphone.
Yeah, that was a game changer.
Right. And specifically the swiping, the iPhone, the ability to shrink the internet down was technology I still don't think we've fully reckoned with. It changed everything. But in the book, I really chart, using quarters that my mom gave me to use payphones, through to my, like I think in the book I mentioned that I buy my first clamshell cell phone because people were using them to call from the doomed flights being flown into the towers. So I get my first cell phone because I'm afraid and because I'm like, well, we've got to be connected now, right? There's no time to use a cell phone or to use a payphone. So it was just a very specific period. We were technologically being connected. We all had P1 lines at work, but it wasn't on our person.
God, yeah. Wow, this is really taking me back. It was such an important time period too. And it's like, we easily forget so many things. Like, I know younger people that I talk to, and I think they think that we had cell phones back then and the internet, was like it is now. And I always, no, it wasn't always like that. We didn't always have it at our fingertips. And I always tell them too, gay marriage wasn't around forever either. It's been around for a minute. We haven't, we still have to fight for every single thing. And I think people forget.
And it shocks me how it really hasn't been that long. But there's a part of me that is cheered by that there are a couple generations of people to whom same-sex marriage is like water from a faucet. It's just a thing that has always been. But I've known many couples that, there was a time when it was, it just still blows my mind because I have a distinct memory. I have a memory in 2004 thinking, oh my God, when will people I know who love each other, who are of the same sex, be able to, it was the story of AIDS in New York in the 80s and 90s. When will two people in love be able to, when will one person who's sick be able to be visited by their partner because they're married, right? Like, it still shocks me that it happened, and I think that it is my fear is that when you forget that and lose that sense, then it's easier to be taken from you. Because,
well, as we've learned recently with the abortion issue,
right? It can be taken away because it is not something that should be taken for granted.
No, mostly not. Your book is very lovely, and I think, obviously I know it's going to do very well. Are you working on anything else? What other projects are you working on right now?
God, Dean, I hope so. What am I working? I mean, that's a great question that I've been asked, and by my fiance's father asked me that, and I just kind of like shut down. I was like, I am writing. I would love to write another book. I have a few freelance gigs. I have a Substack. I'm dubious about Substack, but I've been slowly building my Substack, and it's doing well. And I might turn that on and start asking people to start charging people for it. But like it's hard to answer that because I, for the first time, have no idea where the larger media business is going. I have no idea. There's, and I think a lot of people will reflect that too, or if you're listening and you're in the media, I have no idea what the next 6 months look like.
Yeah, it's crazy time for publishing right now. Magazines and newspapers are coming and going. It's just really nuts right now. As a librarian, we never can answer if stuff's going to be around forever for people. Like, I don't know if this magazine will be here tomorrow. We'll see.
It didn't even occur to me the degree to which these changes would impact librarians. Yeah,
So I have a question that's not on the list I gave you. But it's kind of an unfair question, but I want to ask it. So if I think Theater Kids would be a great film. If it was made into a film, who would you want cast in it?
I mean, honestly, I would love to be played by Zendaya, but I don't know how. I'd be more than willing to rewrite the whole book and be like, well, now it's about you. I don't know. I hope. Do you have any ideas?
I kept seeing Timothy Chalamet.
Oh, well, one reason is because Timothy Chalamet looks great with a scarf.
Yes.
Did you see Challengers? Speaking of Zendaya,
no.
It was the sexy threesome tennis movie that came out earlier this year.
No, I did not see that.
Oh, it's a great steamy, sort of borderline, sort of queer, sort of movie about it's a love triangle between professional tennis players. It's great, but one of the actors, I forget who he was. He played Charles in one of the seasons of The Crown.
Oh yeah.
He's a great nerdy sort of actor. I would love to see a movie, if not directly about Theater Kids, to be also just about that scene. I just think it's a great moment.
Yeah, because Fame kind of touched on it a little bit, but not really. It was kind of over, but yeah.
I love it. But you bring up Fame though. Fame is what is great about Fame is capturing that moment of New York that just has been extinct for 20 years now. The New York of 2004, the America of 2004 is wealthier and more stable than the America of 1980, 1979.
Yeah, absolutely.
More diverse.
Yes.
But I would love to capture in 2004 that kind of sense of, it's so hard to describe. Where I was in New York, the sense of sort of brokenness and at the same time, I will take to my grave being afraid of the rest of the country when I would read about how negatively the country responded to anti-war protests and how ardently Americans wanted this war, even though they would change their minds in a couple of years.
Yeah, we sweep that under the rug a lot. A lot of politicians were really calling for blood, and now they're kind of like, oh, it was a long time ago. They're kind of just kicking that away from themselves a little bit.
And writing this book, I'm like, maybe it's just being middle-aged, but I'm just like, it wasn't that long ago. Historically, it wasn't that long ago. But none of this is that long ago. I think COVID, the COVID lockdown really distorted our sense of collective time. 2004 seems like yesterday, end of century.
Yeah. No, because I'll see people that I remember really loving in that time period, and I see them now that they're playing, and they're in movie. They were talking actors, and they're not, playing parents and grandparents. You're like, holy shit, how did that happen?
And
what happened? Have I been in a coma for 20 years?
No, we're rapidly aging, Dean. We're rapidly aging.
Yeah, like that Brat Pack movie came out, and they're like grandparents now, and you're like, what the fuck happened?
I mean, I could talk about that movie well, that's a movie that is like, as a memoirist, it was fascinating to watch that movie because it was a real example of how your memory can deceive you. And so you have Andrew McCarthy, whose memory is that this article, the word brat ruined his career, and it was this great insult. And nearly everyone else he talks to was like, no, I mean, it was, it was fine. So that's what I took away from Brat was how one must be honest with oneself about one's memory.
It's weird, yeah.
Because but in memoir you have to ask yourself what is true and what is fact, and the two things aren't always the same. It's true probably that Andrew McCarthy, to talk about Brat, it's true that he felt slighted and insulted and embarrassed, and it's true that he probably blamed that instead of an agent or his own talent, but it's not fact.
Yeah.
There's more Rob. I mean, the people in that article that they also mentioned, other Brat Packers that they mentioned, were Tom Cruise and Robert Downey Jr. Like, the Brat Pack designation did nothing to their career.
Yeah, they still, a lot of them had to really struggle and work really hard, even though they had that onus of that whole Brat Pack thing. I remember watching those films and just thinking, like, why do these people have so much fucking money and my family doesn't? Because it was the 80s and everybody was like, it was pretty horrible. I thought the 80s sucked, like, as far as like everybody has like nostalgia, and I'm like, I could definitely skip the 80s, because there's some great stuff, but
people, the 80s movies are so largely, and that's not always the case. There's a lot of great indie, dark, fucked up 80s movies, but the popular movies people love, the Hollywood was really in an entertain, bread and circus mood, and that's why I love David Lynch, right? Because in the 80s, when he comes out with Blue Velvet, he's like, look, all the suburban, smiling, happy 80s proto 50s shit is a lie. The town is really run by a drug addicted Dennis Hopper, and their body parts in the, people. And I'd also counter, Dean, that a lot of millennial and Gen Zers have. We call it nostalgia. I don't think it's nostalgia because they didn't remember the 80s, but they are drawn to the culture of the 80s. And why not? The movies were hell bent on entertaining. Like, I showed my partner, and she's like, she's about to turn 40. I showed her Back to the Future for the first time, and I hadn't watched that movie in forever. And that movie, every second of that movie is hell bent on you having a good time.
Yeah.
It was so not reality. I try to tell people, imagine the opposite vibe of that movie. that's what we were living in.
Yeah.
It was also a time of denial and disease and dishonesty. It was an era where, like 2004, where if you were anyone but a white straight man and his wife, you were not up at the top of the pyramid.
Yeah, exactly.
I love shit talking the 80s and and again, I love some of those, those Brat Pack movies, but they were so very, I mean,
Yeah, it's really
so
glossy. Yeah, they really were, and it just, yeah, it wasn't the reality that I saw. So they're kind of, you feel cheated, kind of watching, and we're like, so who's getting this reality? I'm not.
Right. But we bring up the term, in entertainment, in terms of entertainment history, escapism. Escapist entertainment is coined during a time of great economic turmoil and world war, right? People are going to the original escapist movies in the 30s because 1 out of 4 people are unemployed. It's a disaster. People need to escape. 80s movies were escapist. And the question is, why were we escaping?
Yeah, we definitely needed to. I mean, I love the Lynch movies and the John Waters films because to me that seemed to be my life. That was reality to me. Like I saw it as like that's and like Cronenberg too. Like that stuff seemed more in line with what I thought reality was like. Unfortunately,
I am drawn. Look, that's why I love Stephen Sondheim. Like I was drawn in the 80s I was drawn in the 80s and in my life to artists who I felt, especially when I was younger, were telling me the truth.
Yeah.
John Waters is so wacky, and I there's a part of me that's like, I think that there are certain Gen Zers who should watch his 70s movies so that their head can explode. John Waters, David Lynch, these were artists who I felt were trying to tell me the truth or a truth, and they weren't bullshitting me. And and that's why, again, Sondheim as a kid, I would listen to his musicals and I'd be like, oh, he's not full of shit.
Yeah.
And I think that's, there's a part of me that, like, I would imagine the greatest compliment I could receive for a theater kid would be somebody, some teenager or somebody in their early 20s saying that about the book. I love artists who can be honest.
I totally agree. John, I want to thank you for being on the podcast today. I've loved talking to you, and getting to talk to you is a dream. I've always loved your writing, and I love your book, and I think everybody else is going to too. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Gene, thank you.
That's all the time left we have on the Well Seasoned Librarian Podcast. We've been talking with award-winning writer John Devore. You can purchase his book Theater Kids by going to the link in the bio. Come back next week for more food writers and cookbook authors. Until then, I'll see you at the library.